So I want to kind of quickly go over what we talked about the last time we met about command and control for this. And essentially, I'm just going to take a 5 minute quick review because what um, the other presenters are going to give you today is really the high level stuff that you need to know. This is the foundation for the kind of nuts and bolts stuff I gave you last week. So a quick review of that nuts and bolts are, first off, think of ICS as a scalable way to divide labor when you're dealing with complex search situations or any kind of event. There's no reason we can't go ahead and have those defined roles because they give you clarity when people need to do things. All of a sudden, uh, you have the ability to go ahead and everybody knows who's going to handle what. And as soon as that's, uh, it, you'll find that that will decomplexify things. It'll simplify things. It'll make your life a lot easier to plan those things out before you start rolling down the street behind your dog. The next thing we have to think about is that in that division of labor, somebody's got to be in charge. Uh, Canine officers are, yeah, I'm going to confess, we're all kind of like type A personalities. We've got to get over it and realize we got to let loose of the reins of some things and let somebody else run the show so that we can focus on the thing that we bring that nobody else can, and that is running the dog. So that primary officer could be the first officer there, could be the senior officer, but somebody's got to be in charge and make the calls about what's going to happen where. Ideally, you've had opportunities to work with this person in the past, and you can understand each other's operating methods and the importance of containment and things like that. And then we move on from there. Um, after we get to that, you got to talk about containment. Uh, I come from a tracking centric agency. In Seattle, 87% of our work was tracks, and we found that containment was critical for us. In the old days, it was a lot simpler. Before you had cell phones and Uber and dial an accomplice, it was a lot easier. But now it's a lot tougher. Uh, and that's why containment is even more important than ever. The containment officer should set up in diagonally opposite corners, start wide, and if there are additional units to send in, set them offset from those diagonally opposite corners. So if you started out northwest, southeast, then the next cars come in tighter to the scene, setting up northeast, southwest. Better to set wide than have it too narrow. You don't want this person just running out of containment before you get it established. The point of having the diagonally offset on that is you create multiple lines of sight and multiple little boxes in which you can say, yeah, I see movement here. I see this person here. I see an Uber circling and not finding somebody to pick up. That might be a clue. So we want to think about that. The canine officer's sole job is to focus on the dog. If you're trying to run the show while you're focusing on the dog, things will go bad. Now, there's a difference between walking the point for your search team and being in charge of the whole scene. You can give advice, you can give input, but cede control of the whole scene to the officer that's going to be the primary officer. That's the incident commander. Scrolling through this and moving on, we talked about the importance of a pre-deployment briefing. It is really important that you get all the details about the call so that there's shared knowledge amongst everybody that's going on in your search team. Everybody's got to be on the same page about the suspect description, what the crime they're going to arrest somebody is, whether there were any weapons involved, what kind of risk this person poses, what kind of criminal history they may have. All sorts of things like that are there. But most important, you have to form a tactical plan. You've got to get together and say, when we get here, I'm walking point with the dog. The dog will lead us on the track. I need a dedicated canine cover, one person whose job is to make sure that I'm being covered while I'm focusing on the dog. And then I need somebody on the opposite side to be covered on that side. And maybe you'll have somebody else running behind you as a rear guard. If you're lucky and you have that many people, it's a great way to run things. Just realize that when you do that, when you're running that, everybody's got to know what their job is. Make a decision beforehand, either who exactly is going to be the arrest team that will move forward and take control of the suspect or call the suspect back to them to take control of them, or if it's based on where they are in relation to the team. So in other words, if this person pops up to the left, well, it makes sense the left guard and the rear guard take control. Or maybe the left guard and the dedicated canine cover then shifts out of that role. Canine cover takes cover behind something big enough to stop bullets, and rear guard makes sure that you got 360 coverage and protection. If you can get that kind of plan in place beforehand, that's great. Understand that plans only survive first contact with the suspect, and after that, you've got to be able to adapt. But it's far easier to go into it with a plan that you can modify than to try and formulate one on the fly while bullets are whizzing around your ears. So in that regard, failing to plan is planning to fail. So make sure that you walk out and you develop that nice, solid tactical plan before you get that dog out and moving down the street. During the search process, maintain tactical discipline. Stay in your roles. Stay in your roles and think de-escalation every opportunity. Why? Not because it's what keeps us out of civil court or anything like that. It's because it makes tactical sense to generate compliance. The safest arrest you can make is one where you generate compliance. If you don't have to go hands-on and huckle-buck with somebody, you're going to be in far better shape than if you wind up having to, step out, give up cover, get in that person's space, not knowing what kind of weapons they may have, not knowing if they have accomplices in ground that they've had an opportunity to spend some time in longer than you have. Just doesn't make sense. So take those opportunities to pause. Dog gives you indication, pause. Give a warning, try and generate compliance. New environment where they probably didn't hear the last warning, stop, pause, give a warning, wait, listen, see what they do, move forward like that. If the suspect's located, think about this. Now, the first thing to think about is if you find that person and the dog is giving an indication, just like we said, try to de-escalate, try to call them out, give them an opportunity to give up. Believe me, it is a real time saver not to have to spend all the time on post-bite procedures. So go ahead and make sure that you do that as best you can. You can do this safely. Stay behind things big enough to stop bullets. Maintain tactical discipline. Everybody covers their angles, and use time, distance, angles, and shielding to your advantage to generate compliance. And you're probably going to come out of this okay. If you can get away with that, that's going to be great. Some suspects are just not going to comply. They are going to stay out there no matter what you say, and you're going to wind up having a bite. So during that tactical briefing we talked about earlier, you should have talked about what happens if the dog's on a bite. If, for example, that suspect starts to stab the dog, that dog is considered by the courts to be property. You cannot use lethal force to defend the dog. You can only use lethal force to defend people, officers or others, according to the court. So in that regard, you have to go ahead and make sure your search officers understand this as a part of that pre-deployment briefing, so that when you get in this situation, if the dog's tussling with somebody and that guy's trying to hurt the dog, okay, what are the limits on what they can do? Understand that if they go in there and they go hands-on with that suspect while the dog is engaged with them, some dogs will say, wait a minute, you don't look like, my handler. Why are you here? And they'll switch. They shouldn't, but it happens. And so you want to make sure that you do everything you can to keep this as clean as you possibly can. And then you also have to understand your post-bite procedures. Everybody has to be on the same page in your unit, in your training group, whatever, on how it happens. In my agency, for example, we have to call a supervisor to the scene, preferably a canine supervisor. And that supervisor has to follow a prescribed procedure for conducting an investigation. It's very thorough. It's very detailed. It involves recorded statements and all that stuff. If you've got body-worn video to document the fact that you've done your job as far as taking care of that person, awesome. That's the way it should go. And remember that as we go through this, our mantras are going to be that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Just like when you're drawing and using your firearm, moving through this search in a disciplined manner will get you better results than if you're running hucklebuck. I know, I've got it. And look, I just retired, and I had to, about a year before I retired, I had to have my foot rebuilt because I had gone hucklebuck way too many times in my young days and sprained it, and it never healed. And I had to get that fixed before I left. Don't do that. This job is worth it. It's a very satisfying job, especially when everything goes well. And the easiest way to make sure it goes well is stay within the plan and scale this system down and use it to your advantage. And remember, everything must be reasonable, necessary, and proportional. That kind of wraps it up for me. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share and turn it back to Don.
Thanks, Steve. we're going to start with you, Scott. Let me get you up and running here, but that was very informative. That the information that Steve posted is also on our USPCA YouTube site. The entire instruction for that day can be seen there. All right, Scott, I'm going to fire it up.
Okay, hang on a sec. Good morning, everybody. Let me just give a real quick intro to this. If you have not had your, it's 10:15 here. If you haven't had your coffee, this is designed to get you, to wake you up. But it also demonstrates what the point is, to demonstrate how quickly it will go to shit on the street. And many of you are senior enough to have seen it, but how quickly it can go to shit on the street and turn into the chaos that we're talking about. So, okay, go ahead.
Officer needs help at Ramona Gardens. Officer needs help. I repeat, officer needs help at Ramona Gardens. We have shots fired.
All units, officer needs help, Ramona Gardens. Officer needs help, Ramona Gardens.
Fort George Square. Shots fired. Ramona Gardens. Get in there. I've got the suspect in between the bungalows. Everybody respond to the bungalows. Officer needs help. Officer needs help. Go from the 9th to Stanford. Officer needs help.
All units, officer needs help, 9th to Stanford.
Good. Officer down. Officer needs help. Shots fired. You're seeing the star in front of 332 far. Officer needs help. Be advised. Officer in plain clothes in a green Honda. Get us there. Get us two vehicles. White
Officer down.
down. Shots fired. Officer down. 8-4. Through the Broadway. 8-4 Broadway.
25, we have an officer traveling out of criminal. 30 years old. Just a breathing gunshot wound. 3 George 31. Any in the vicinity, 3 George 31 is requested backup.
Saturday, March 15, 2020 seconds.
We need backup. We're going to be 42nd Place and Hoover. All officers are coming for. Officer needs help!
All units, officer needs help, exposition and Gramercy. Officer needs help, exposition and Gramercy. 324 is closer to 211 suspect.
Everybody stay off the air. Officer, we got shots fired here. Suspect barricaded himself inside. We need a perimeter set up. Shots fired. Officer needs help. Join down. Shots fired. Officer needs help. Join down. 1073, we're Valeria, Loma Verde. We got shots fired. Possible suspect down. Need backup airship. Supervisor. 110, the pursuit is terminated. PCH at Bank. I need a CP set up. Have an officer involved shooting there. Panic. Shotgun shots to the chest and body. Not conscious, not breathing. You're ready to move to our area. Ambulance, code 3. Got bodies. We got bodies. Ambulance. We need ambulances. We need ambulances. More than one. We need more than one ambulance. Is it code 4 officers? Any officers injured? Down. Officers down. Officers down. Officers down. Officers down. Give me some more folks here. Officer needs help.
All units, officer needs help. There's an officer down, 19828 Welby Way. Officer needs help. There's an officer down, 19828 Welby Way.
All 324 officer needs help. 7627 Long Canyon Boulevard. Officer needs help. Shots fired. Clear to your body. You have shots fired here at 112 in Berlindo. 1286, we got a sniper. All units, officer needs help. We got a sniper in the area. 112 in Berlindo. Where is he?
Okay, well, that woke me up. So that was a colleague of mine put that together based on the officer-involved shooting investigations that we reviewed and investigated over the years. I did the review portion of most of those cases, and I got to look at those. Those were presentations basically to a police commission after the investigation was done and the chief's report had to be presented. Anyway, it just demonstrates how quickly things can go terribly to hell on the street, and how quickly chaos can ensue. So with that, what this piece is going to be is more about your responsibility as a senior tactician and leader on the department. And it may either initiate as a canine call, or it may end up being a canine call. You may end up fulfilling that role. But more importantly, it's the responsibility that you bear as a leader, whether you like it or not. So when you when you put stripes on, you know what you're putting on your arm. When you get a dog, you're considered a senior tactician, and things will naturally, as everyone has seen, fall to you. And they may fall to you as a police canine specialist, or they may fall to you as an agency leader when initially there is not a place right away for a dog to be deployed. It may take you responding, stepping up, taking control, and just being the leader that the situation needs to settle it before your role as a handler comes into play. So with that said, I've been on scenes, and I only share things that I know everyone else has had the same experience. When less experienced people have stepped up and taken charge, and we were all kind of surprised, and they stepped up and stepped into a position of calm and leadership and took control of a scene, even when senior people were not present. So we don't want to default always to supervisors or to leaders. It's everyone's responsibility to maintain control and to step up and be a leader. So talking about ICS, this is kind of going to be a discussion on ICS Lite, which means that the actual formal points of ICS are not relevant. What's relevant is the leadership initiated at a place of crisis where calm needs to be instilled to effectively carry out our responsibilities as a group, to keep everyone safe, and to make sure the public is safe, and that we fulfill the objectives, which is essentially to capture the suspect and stop the problem. So the thing about this is it has to be part of the culture. And I'm going to talk just for a second about that. If a crisis occurs and effective command and control is not part of the culture, it's not going to be there when the crisis actually occurs, when it goes to hell. If it is part of the day-to-day activity of the police department, and we'll talk about each of these things, but if it's part of the day-to-day activity of the police department, then when the shit really hits the fan, then it will naturally occur, and it'll be something that just is like a good perimeter, water over a globe. It just kind of will come to pass, and it'll happen. But if it's not there, if it's not instilled through training and culture, then it's just going to go more to hell than it does on a day-to-day basis when there's a crisis. Same with in-service training. These are concepts that should be practiced. Leadership, command and control concepts should be practiced during in-service training as well. And we shouldn't always defer to or point to a particular supervisor or someone who's going to run a problem. It should be more of a natural progression. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm sure these all sound fairly familiar. I'll just let you take a look at them. But the most experienced person is assumed to be in control. And like Steve talked about, the handler oftentimes gets sucked into that role when, it's really not the best place for them to be, especially when they're having to deploy a dog. Then when they're having to deploy a dog, they don't want to give up the responsibility of running the scene because it's always been done like that in the organization. So you have a radio in one hand, a leash in the other, a flashlight in the other hand. You have, you're trying to control other things. You're trying to watch the dog. You're trying to communicate with people all at the same time. It doesn't work. When the problem becomes significant and it becomes a command and control issue, the handler has to assume the role of handler. A incident commander has to step up. And even if, like Steve said, the handler needs to turn around and say, someone step up and take charge here. I've got to go find this guy. Something to communicate that. But in a well-oiled machine, when you're practicing this as a matter of, day-to-day activity, that shouldn't occur. The lead officer is in charge until someone relieves them. The handler should never have to step up and take charge. And I've seen agencies where the handler's complaint is, when we get there, everyone just steps out of the way and we got to handle the whole thing. And this has been a part of culture for years and years. And at places where the handler is a little older. But this is something that is not really most effective in doing police work. The handler has to be able to do their job, and handling the actual problem in a command and control structure has to be, more of a unified thing. Somebody has to be in charge, like Steve was talking about. Other issues: supervisors don't show up or just remain silent. That culturally, organizationally, that should not be okay. Supervisors put on strike for a reason. When they respond, they should take control. Lieutenants may not, but the sergeants are expected to take field control of a scene. It should be that way. Oftentimes there's no clear command post and just people are running huckety-buck and giving different locations out, and I'm at Avenue A and B and I need 2 officers here. When the person steps up and takes charge, and I'll go through these real quick in a step-by-step thing, they should announce themselves. I am the incident commander. Smith is going to be in charge of tactics and the operation. The command post is at the Vaughn's parking lot. And that's that. When that broadcast goes out, calm will ensue. People will know someone's in charge. There is a place to coordinate, at least initially. They know who's in charge. They know that it's going to be something that's going to be in control. The worst thing in chaos is when no one is in charge and everyone's screaming on the radio and it goes on, which is natural for a while. It's natural. You're going to have that, and officers are naturally going to respond to the scene to provide assistance and do what they got to do. But over time, everyone, and I know you're all feeling the same thing, everyone is looking at the radio like, someone step up and take control of this problem so we can start focusing on solving it. And it shouldn't take more than, a very short amount of time to get that command and control underway. Okay, next. Okay, so we're going to talk about ICS Light, which is just the things that I've talked about: stepping up, taking control, solving a problem, making sure someone's in charge, and it's not always the handler or the person who it just automatically defaults to. Okay, next. Okay, again, this is very simple. The best thing about Incident Command System and SIMS is that it creates titles, and titles can be used however you want to use them. And we get caught up in ICS 300 and 200 and all the classes and what we're supposed to be doing and what's a branch, what's not a branch. I was lucky enough to be able to look at some of the after action reports for some of the incidents that occurred around the country during the George Floyd protest. And ICS had an absolute function in its core. But when it came down to it, there were some occasions when they tried to force it into a compartment and it didn't quite work. So you had an incident commander who was in charge of a city, essentially. You had 5 different operational areas going on at the same time, or you had 2 or 3 different. You had a protest down here and you had a protest over here, and this one got out of control. But there was one incident commander trying to make decisions for everyone, for both 2 or 3 scenes. When that occurred, the way they dealt with it was they just ad hoc. A sergeant would pick up and say, "Hey, this is John Smith. I'm over here, and I'm gonna we'll give get the equipment to John. John's gonna need it." And okay, that's okay to stop and make 3 different designated incident command posts, 3 incidents for the sake of solving these problems under one unified command system. So someone should be in charge of the city, and there can be an incident commander at the park, excuse me, an incident commander at City Hall and such. And so you have who's in charge of the City Hall incident, and that's going to be a separate response location or containment points and a staging area and everything else. So incident command needs to just be a flexible system where people in charge are identified. Incident command post, which is centralized meeting locations and jumping off points, are identified for wherever the problem is, whether there's one or more than one. The titles used, whether it's a branch, operations branch, canine, umbrella of that branch, it doesn't matter as long as there is firm command and control over the scene and there's a place to respond. So in my mind, based on all the stuff I've seen around the country, it's who's in charge. Is that person properly in charge at that scene and or other scenes? If not, someone needs to be in charge of both of those locations. You have a crash here, you have the crime scene here. You have two scenes you need to control. You can have one centralized command post or staging area, but it just needs to be who's in charge of what, make it clear, make it identifiable, and then calm will prevail. It is just like magic. After the chaos starts to settle and things are communicated clearly on the primary frequency, or however you're going to communicate it, things start to calm down. So announcing it is important, and I'll cover this a couple of times. The key to incident command is someone needs to come up and say, I will be the incident commander, tap on shoulder, right? We've all been through the training. You handle the problem. You've got this thing that you're the primary officer. You need to solve this problem. Canine is here. You work with Canine. I'm going to have someone set up a containment, do whatever. I will relieve you of that. I will handle communication. You go solve it. I'll be incident commander. Radio, this is Sam 32 or Canine 1. I will be incident commander at the scene. The command post will be at the Vons parking lot east side. It'll be off my car for now. Everything will calm. People will know where to go. This officer now is not focused on 12 things. He's focusing on solving that problem or partnering with the canine handler or whatever needs to be done to get to move forward on that problem. But it's the chaos that's ensuing in the meanwhile that causes people to get hurt, that self-deploy, self-report to areas. Other agencies come in, they don't know where to go or who's in charge. Cops are type A, handlers are type A, so they all take it upon themselves to do whatever. You'll actually in some scenes see 3 or 4 cars parked at different areas with command maps on the trunk, and they're doing different things at different spots. No one's coordinating with each other. They're all on different tactical frequencies. Getting on, being the person who says, I'm incident commander, the one command post is here. We're going to coordinate everything from here, including staging. Sergeant Grant will be in charge of staging. All officers responding from different jurisdictions should see him. And then that allows operational officers to go do their thing. Okay, next. I'm just seeing what I wrote here. What I'm kind of I work for Bill Bratton, and Bill Bratton made a lot of significant changes in law enforcement. In all of us, all of our careers were affected in some way by the leadership skills and concepts that Bill Bratton brought to the table. Not just him, but everyone who preceded him in building all of these great concepts that he did. But his big thing was accountability. And before Bill Bratton came to the LAPD, there wasn't a whole ton of accountability for command. If something went wrong, it would fall on the cop. The cop did something wrong. And the sergeants oftentimes were like, I wasn't there, or it was already underway, and everything would fall on the cop. And in some places, it's still like that today. The cop is the one that always gets thrown under the bus. Well, it didn't happen when he showed up. When he showed up, the sergeant was in charge. If the sergeant is not in charge, we're going to find out who the sergeant was, why he did not assume that command. And the words command were used for every major incident. And if the incident expanded, then a lieutenant watch commander should have been there and in charge. If not, where was he or she, and why didn't that occur? And then when it expands even more, by the time, for example, a chief level officer or the chief would respond. If a captain's not in charge, he'll probably be removed the next day. And captains and lieutenants were removed. Chiefs were fired. And the message was sent very, very quickly that this is serious stuff. And he knew he had to fire a couple of captains and a couple of chief level officers to make his point that command and control is critical, and it saves lives, and it keeps people calm, and it solves the problem safely and securely within the confines and controls of the organizational structure. And it's really, really important. If he were to respond, or one of his people were to respond and say, what's going on, brief me, who's where, show me the map, and you didn't have some kind of a system where you could tell people what's going on and brief everybody, you'd have hell to pay, and you were moved, someone else was brought in to control the problem. And these are not big problems. This can be a barricade, a simple barricade. It can be anything that goes beyond the first couple of layers of a call or of an incident. Anyway, it's that identifying yourself, identifying the location, who is in charge. The sergeant needs to step up and be in charge. If you have an environment where the sergeant doesn't step up, I've worked in them, we've all worked in them, and they just kind of don't step up and take formal charge because they don't want, they don't mind whispering in the ear of the person. It's okay if the officer is handling it, but if it starts to go to that next level and expand, the sergeant has to say, okay, you're doing a great job, but let you go ahead and handle it operationally. I will then step back and I'll take the umbrella incident. You now move forward. You've done a great job. This thing is now going forward. It's gone another 2 blocks. You're going to need more handlers. You have more people responding. We're going to get an airship over here. This is going to get big. I will handle this. You've done a great job, but now you can handle the problem. I'm going to handle all this other stuff and take over for you. What a sense of relief that gives the operator, the officer who's actually been handling it, who's in charge, who can now focus on solving the problem, coordinating, without having to worry about all this other external stuff that's going on. So there needs to be one person who is in charge, not 3 people on the radio. There has to be just one, and they need to identify themselves, and it can really go a long way. All right, next. All right, so this just reiterates, canine handlers are not just dog handlers. You are, because of your training and your specialization, you are tacticians. You may be able to move into a problem without pulling the dog out, without deploying the dog, and take over the control, the operational and tactical control of the scene. Or you may be using your dog. And of course, if you're using your dog and you're deploying as a handler, your role goes down to be a specific operational element of the incident. But you may be the person to step back under the incident commander, not as always, but under, and take control of it. So, for example, if I was on scene and this thing was going, badly, and I had some chaotic incident, and I had different things happening, and it really didn't call for a dog because of the dynamics or the environment, there's a good chance I would ask the handler, hey, come here, can you take charge of the operations and the tactics here? And I'm going to step over because I've now got another scene over here and I've got this. The handler can then take charge of the tactical incident and actually start coordinating things. And then he can assume it and say, hey, I'm this Canine 1, I'm going to be in charge of the tactical operation at the scene here. We're going to go to attack. We're all going to attack other incidents on TAC 2, whatever. And Lieutenant Smith or Sergeant Smith or whoever is now going to be the incident commander. That way it's clear who's in charge, who's the contact person at the incident, where the command post is, and who is in charge of the tactics and the operation, which is really important. The incident commander, this goes both ways. The incident commander can't always handle the entire operation themselves, although you see that too. He's trying to run a board, he's trying to run communications, he's trying to coordinate with other entities, and he's trying to follow the search and where the suspect is. And that's, again, he's getting caught up. That's called an expanded incident. He needs to just step back, let somebody else focus solely on that, and then he can do the overall stuff and make sure everything's going on. He can quarterback the incident. But sometimes a canine officer's role is to be the tactician on scene, the operator, overseeing the operation itself rather than deploying the dog. Then when it's time to deploy the dog, he says, it's time for me to deploy the dog. This is what I know the incident. I know the thing. This is what I recommend. Incident commander concurs. Someone else steps in to take it, or he assumes operational role and someone else can step back there and be the quarterback for the thing. So it's expandable. Someone has to be in charge of each level. And that way there's always going to be calm. There's always going to be effective communication. There's not going to be, hey, Bob, are you on the corner of it? Yeah, no, I'm at the, okay. Whoa. Okay. Someone needs to be in charge of that, coordinate. We've all seen holes left in perimeters. We've seen crashes. We've seen 5 officers deployed to one corner, none on the other, because communication wasn't necessary. For me, when you assume incident command, communications is like number one. Is first. You're my communications person. You make sure everything you're listening to the radio, you're broadcasting what I say, updating people, things like that, and you use titles, positions, corners, A, B, C, D, whatever you're going to use. So it's all kind of calm. So within a reasonable amount of time, you should have a calm, effective incident command system underway with just a few people. Okay, next. Again, same thing, incident command post. There can be more than one, but it's important to state it. Put it on the radio. Incident command post is such and such. This may, if you're a smaller agency, sometimes it's not that comfortable to do this. It's like, well, we all know where it's going on, the jump off point. Yes, but if you're using the nomenclature, the language of incident command, incident commander, most important, and incident command post, or CP, which we use, then you're used to doing it on everything, absent the car stop or something. But when it expands to a problem, and somebody wants to know what's going on or where it is, who's in charge and where it's taking place. Again, staging areas are important. If you have Lou's spoken about self-reporting from outside agencies. This is a big issue with smaller departments, is when something goes on, agencies self-deploy, self-report from oftentimes all over. They're on their own radio frequency. Sometimes they pony up with their own sergeant, come in as a package. And if they don't have a particular place to go, they're either going to self-deploy on scene and just talk to a cop. Hey, what's going on? Where do you need us? How often does that happen? Somebody with a blue car comes up. Where do you need us? Like, well, who are you? And you have to, well, I don't know. The right thing to say is check in at the command post. They'll tell you where to go. Huge package of cars and officers, check in at the staging area. They're going to hang on to you, and the command post will tell you where you need to deploy to. But it's important, once people start rolling in and you have equipment coming in and you have lights or whatever, you got to have some kind of a staging area set up, even if it's just a little bit away. Okay, next. Okay, just a graphic, a real basic graphic. Every incident is an incident. You have a car stop, you have an OBS activity, you have contact, everything's an incident, and every incident can go directly to shit very quickly. We've all seen it. Everyone here is experienced enough to have seen all levels of stuff. But at the low level of complexity in your car stop, the incident commander technically is the handling officer, and then if it goes poorly and the guy first leaves and now there's something happened or an officer out shooting, the handling officer is the incident commander. And then it gets even worse. The handling officer is the incident commander. He comes and gets relieved. Now he's not, someone else is, but it all starts from A. It doesn't start with someone who's identified as the incident commander. It starts with the person who's in charge. Next, senior officer should step up. Here's really where it gets a little complicated for smaller agencies, especially without a formal process. Senior officers should step up. They're wearing either 2 stripes, FTO, corporal, agent, however they're identified. They should be fully accountable to understand these concepts and to enact them in the field. So when a senior officer is in the field, they should respond to the call, even if it's a canine handler and it's not a dog problem. There should be an expectation that a senior handler will come up and assist the handling officer by stating what's going on. What do you need? Oh man, this guy's in here now. He won't open the door. And okay, well this could go poorly. I'll be incident commander. You handle it, okay? And you don't have to worry about the radio and all that stuff. Okay. 182. I'm going to be incident commander on this, and the incident command post will be at the location, the jump off point location. That way, he uses the radio. He makes the communication. He does everything. And it's just 2 cops, and maybe 3 cops, and now maybe 4. But they all don't go to the cop who initiated it because he's busy probably trying to solve the problem. They come to the incident commander. And then after it goes badly and now you hear a shot fired or you hear some screaming in the house and you can't get in, it's like, okay, let's rush in and kick the door. Whoa, we have a command post. We have a perimeter. Let's just slow it down. This is where the incident commander is to slow it down for a second, pull back. Let's move this command. We sort of, what I think was a shot. Let's adjust the command post down about 100 feet to that parking lot there. Let's just make sure we have a tight perimeter, and I'll call everyone into the command post, and we'll deploy from here. If you don't have these things in place, you have the problem can spin out of control very quickly. You have the officer, he's inside. Okay, I heard shots fired. Okay, I'm going to go in. I'm going in. Okay, wait, you got the back. Wait, Joe, can you get? Okay, that's when an incident like this, before it spins up, can be calmed, can be settled with command, with controls in place, who's in charge, where we're going to have the command post. Okay, and this is the most important piece of it, this second stage. The next stage is not as complicated because it's already set up. Now we're talking about a sergeant coming in and assuming control and taking over and just doing the right thing, relieving officers to move forward and solve the problem. And then the last one, of course, is just an expectation that, when it expands even more, that captains come in and all that and assume command. And we've all seen that. And sometimes they're held accountable for doing it right, and sometimes they're not. But the real key is between 1 and 2. When senior officers, when they're responding and it turns into not just an assist or a backup, but it turns into a more complex problem, the role of the senior officer, perhaps the handler, because of his experience, is to step in and say, look, you focus on this, and I'm going to step back and be incident commander. We're just not used to doing that in smaller departments. I'll be incident commander, the CP is going to be over here. Some of us are, if you are, bless you, but there are agencies that don't do that, and they don't want to do it because, and I don't know why. A lot of times it's like, oh, it sounds silly. We all know who's in charge. Okay, that's not the point. The point is to have an effective culture of assuming command and making sure there's a command and control in place at all incidents when they start to expand. Because when the plane crash happens or the real shit happens, it will just be a natural thing. You're not going to have to try to figure out what channels work and, go through terminology and stuff. So this second phase is really the most important. Okay, next. Okay, as important as any of this stuff, more important than any of this stuff, is how do we learn from lessons from things that have occurred in our organization, in regional incidents that have occurred, and nationally. So what has and I'll use some examples based on, because this is kind of something that I do, is I look at other agencies and what they do and how they apply lessons learned and how they change and become learning organizations, or whether they do or they do not. So this is a key point. So I want to ask you, just in your organization, when you have a bite, let's just use Canine as a reference. When you have a bite, do you debrief it? Does your unit debrief it? If your unit debriefs it, that's good. If your unit doesn't debrief it and you just do a high five in the hallway the next night and, hey, did you hear? Did you hear? Did you hear? You're missing lessons. I don't care what the lessons are, whether you parked on the wrong side of the street or the right side of the street, and what you did was ideal. But there are lessons that can be learned from every single incident that occurs. And it's quality through continuous improvement. The difference between agencies that succeed and soar in every way, and those that tend to wane, fail, or have problems, maybe end up being under federal oversight or whatever, or agencies that learn or don't learn. Learning agencies are those that have processes in place where they're constantly debriefing what they do. They're constantly learning lessons, whether it's good or it's bad or it's neutral. This can be in the form of just after action reviews of basic incidents or larger scale incidents that are not political. They're just realistic internal reviews. The good thing legally is a lot of internal reviews are not discoverable. They don't need to be recorded or anything, but there's a lot of internal stuff that discovery won't touch. because they don't want to interfere with the internal process of police departments that are trying to improve. So you won't have to, be deposed on what was discussed in a TAC debrief or something. But these debriefings are critical. I've overseen a lot of officer-involved shootings, some of which ended fatally for both parties, a lot of different types of critical incidents. Every single one of them from about 2006, 2007 on has what's called a tactical debrief. No matter what occurs, everything's covered in a tactical debrief. And the reason it's everything is because people aren't offended when you say, well, we're going to debrief that incident. People in the old days, when you say, well, that's an incident, we're going to biopsy, we're going to debrief it. Well, why us? We didn't do anything wrong. And now it's every single incident that occurs that results in a larger scale use of force or is critical or complex is subject to a debrief at some level. It can be a large organizational one if it's a massive shooting, or it can be just a roll call briefing where the lessons are discussed, talked about, and identified. You glean those lessons and you pass them on through generations and through training or however you're going to do it. And maybe you pass 5 lessons on and 1 sticks. But every 5 incidents, you've got several incidents that have stuck through the organization and through culture and training. And it really can make a huge difference. Conversely, I just looked at one department where they absolutely refused to do it. Just refuse, because they don't want to embarrass each other and they don't want to talk about each other. This is 1970s talk. Okay, this is not progressive policing talk. Everything was fine. Everything was okay. No, I know, but yeah, it's fine. It's fine. That's fine. Anyone could have made that mistake. But the thing is, everything turned out okay. No, no, there were so many lessons to be learned. And I went on a ride. I'm just giving you a little example. So I went on a ride with some of the officers in this agency, and I said, okay, there was a big shooting. 100 and fill in the blank rounds were fired by officers. Your morning watch officer on, B squad, whatever, what did you learn from that incident? We didn't learn anything. I said, what do you mean you didn't learn anything? This was a massive thing. It was in the paper and everything else. It's just one of several that occur in the nation, but what did you learn from it as a cop and as partners and as a organization? We didn't learn from it. We never were talked to. They didn't talk to us. How can they not have talked to you? But it's been a year. They have gone through all these internal administrative machinations to come up with what the problems were. They never talked to the cops. He said, no, they never came and talked to the cops. They never asked the cops. Even the guys that were involved weren't involved. It was like a hierarchical discussion. Okay. That is a problem. That is a problem. Cops never learned from that incident. So how can you expect anything different from the cops the next time around? What if someone gets hurt or injured because you didn't talk about a thing that happened? And it was a pretty significant incident. But the bottom line is the lessons to be learned from incidents is really, really important. And if you want us to start in your own shop, debriefing bites, every bite, even if it's a brief debrief over a cup of coffee. Hey, Bill, tell us about the bite. Okay, oh, that's great. Oh, well, and then this happened, and thank God this guy was there to help, and this happened, and great. Someone in that room is going to learn something. Someone in that room is going to gain something from that short conversation. And the larger ones should be discussed in a larger scale. If the organization is not doing this formally, it should. And you can pass that along. I've got a document that's called Tactical Debrief that I put together that teaches agencies how to debrief without insulting each other. It just is a process for getting together and going through a problem or going through a call for service, something that happened on Morning Watch and talking about it. Not just we talked about it on Morning Watch. That's a sergeant talking and no one answering. I'm talking about people involved in the room having an honest conversation without ranks and titles and learning from the experience. Anyway, it's really valuable to police departments and something that needs to be embraced, especially after all these things from last year. I don't know if anyone's talking about what the things that occurred, but the lessons to be learned can save jobs and careers in the future. Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate it. And yes, as Steve states, debrief everything. It's really important, and someone will always learn from it. So Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. It's appreciated.
My name is John Kerwick, and I just wanted to give everybody a little information on a few things that I think is going to benefit all of us. This presentation I'm about to talk about is not about the Chelsea bombing that occurred back in September of 2016. It's not a war story, and it's certainly not an after-action review. But I'm going to bring up 2 points that I think helped us as canine handlers, and improvements that we made to our unit, and improvements that were made to organization and getting the job done that night, facing a real and present problem. So I've told you what this is not about, but this slide depicts what this entire presentation should be about. It's about flexibility. It's about being not so tied up in everything that we've been trained in all the time and having to do it exactly that way. This is about being on the street and being flexible and facing things that really challenge us. Now, for just a minute, make believe you're one of these gentlemen riding these motorcycles. I don't think they got up in the morning figuring they'd be chasing an ostrich down the street. I really don't think that was part of their training as cops in that country. But I think that, like good cops that we all are, no matter where we work, we have to be flexible. And granted, they're not chasing a perp. That's not an armed ostrich. But they're doing what they have to do to contain the situation. And I think as canine handlers, as canine sergeants, lieutenants, bosses, handlers, we all have to be flexible in what we're doing. The things that come after us, the bad things that happen, are just opportunities for us to find new ways to do things. So to me, that means a whole lot. I want to thank this guy. I'm going to set the stage here real quickly. I'm going to thank Ahmed Khan Rahimi, and he managed to set off an explosive device one day at a parade for Marines, and then he managed to blow up a large pressure cooker type device down in Lower Manhattan on a Saturday. And because of all his bad things that he performed, and unfortunately some people did get hurt, a lot of people got hurt, we in Canine were able to adapt and overcome. And we came up with some plans to try to protect everybody else for the next couple of days. So this Rahimi gentleman managed to plant a pressure cooker in a place down on 23rd Street, New York City. And just the sheer force of that took a dumpster that was nearby and mangled it. It was just a small portion of things, but I wanted to show the magnitude of the blast. These are the poor people, or some of the people, still running around 15 minutes after, confused and dazed. And there were probably 70 people that got injured that evening. No fatalities, thank God. But I'm going to set the stage. It was a Saturday night. I'm out to dinner with the girlfriend and another couple, and I'm looking. We're at not a fancy restaurant, kind of a tavern kind of place, and I'm looking at the TV screen at the wall, and I see these kind of pictures flying across. So I kind of knew at that point, since it was New York, I was probably going to be leaving the girlfriend behind that night. I secured her ride with the other couple, and grabbed my car and started heading into New York City. On the way down, I managed to make some phone calls and get some people together, and we started talking about a plan of action, what we were going to do, what we were going to protect, what we were not going to protect. And then something else happened. They found another device several blocks away from where this occurred. It was another pressure cooker device, just like the first one. The first one had detonated, this one had not. So now we knew that our worst case scenario was that there were multiple scenes where this might happen again. Now, this doesn't have to be pressure cookers or explosive devices. This could be a shooting. This could be any kind of mobile incident that's happening It could be a guy who's carjacking on one block, getting out and running 3 blocks and doing another carjacking. I'm asking all of you to use your imagination here. Do not limit this to just explosives. So if you can see from the map here, we're probably 8 blocks away from each other where we had the 2 devices that were located. And at that point, we knew Canine was going to play a major role here. Some of the city fathers and the major players in the departments, because multiple police departments were involved in this, began to think that, oh, we'll call Canine. They'll just search the whole area and they'll clear it out for us. And unfortunately, we've all had people above us give us orders that just didn't make it. They weren't clear. They didn't tell us how to get things done. And they gave us sometimes a role that we just couldn't fulfill. So a lot of discussion went back and forth about how it just wasn't possible to search every street between point A and point B. And, you know, thinking ahead too, there's probably going to be a point C coming up at some point, and where do we end? So it's a Saturday night. We don't have a whole lot of teams working. The other agencies that were involved in this didn't have a lot either, but we started using some of our resources and calling people in at this point. So how do we get this thing done? How do we search that much area, trying to keep the public safe? Because remember, this isn't just a threat. This is a real event. 1 bomb already detonated. 1 detonated the day before at another location. And how do you do that without just freezing a city? I know Boston did that when they had the marathon bombing, and they felt that was the right thing to do. But I don't think we could do that in today's day and age. So I will say this. I'm happy to say that some of the people above me actually realized that Canine was a good resource for this. And I agreed with them, although we couldn't do it exactly the way they wanted to get it done. So we were assigned basically 2 square miles of area in this street at street level only to search for explosive devices. Now, I want you to remember, this doesn't have to be about explosives. This could be about somebody throwing a firearm out of a car while you're chasing them. This could be about some drugs that were thrown out of a car or some other evidence that was thrown out of a car when someone was running. And so this is not just about explosives. This is about looking for items in the street. And again, it could be explosives, it could be contraband, it could be firearms. And I think that hopefully that will keep everybody interested in this. So we started out just like in the beginning. We got multiple cops. We got a canine handler and a dog. We had a supervisor. We created little teams that kind of roved up and down some streets. And we tried to make this work. And to the cops' credit, they did a very good job at what they could do, but we really couldn't clear the types of spaces that we were assigned to. As you can see, this went on and it was slow and tedious. Again, we had no true task force, or we had never trained to do this type of street clearing before. So we're also worried, you know, if this is pressure cookers or whatever kind of devices, we could have a car bomb, and we could have propane tanks in cars, things that dogs could not detect. There could be all types of things. We had other issues in our past where they had a car ready to go that was gasoline and propane. So we knew that a visual inspection was just as important with a canine. And again, remember, this could be contraband we're looking for or a firearm. This created a lot of different challenges for us. As you can see, there's a whole lot of distractions on the street. And this is just a typical street without a lot of traffic, I might add, that had a lot of bags, a lot of things, a lot of food, a lot of debris. And we weren't sure what was in any of that, but we could only do some type of search on it and hope for the best. But we had real challenges coming up. Our real challenges happened when we started seeing cars parked, multiple cars, because, you know, people who want to hurt us sometimes use cars to conceal an item or hurt us as well. And one of the biggest things that we learned here too was the environmental challenges. And I'm going to point to this subway grate right here. There's a tremendous amount of air coming out of it from the subway system and a heck of a lot of heat and noise. So if you weren't using the right dog and he was never exposed to this type of situation, because they're all over the city, we're asking the dog to sniff for explosives while he's got all these distractions going on in the environment. So I can't stress enough that you always pick the right dog for your venue. It's just, if we had taken dogs that, every agency that was involved here had dogs that were able to succumb these distractions. But I've seen dogs in other parts of the country or other parts of the state even, where they're not used to this type of thing. And, they'll probably never face it in their careers. And they will have other distractors and other issues to deal with that we wouldn't. So we started thinking about a method to search the street and to clear a street quickly. And we had a lot of space to clear, but we wanted to do it thoroughly. We wanted to do it safely. So eventually, and my police officers that were on the ground kind of came up with this themselves. And after the debriefing we had that night, we talked about how they came up with this, and it was worth sharing this with others. And I think it's very important. So we came up with a 4-man task force. And again, I'm going to reiterate this to keep everybody interested. This is not just about explosives. This could be about contraband secured somewhere here in between a building and you're looking for it with a narcotics dog. This could be about a firearm located under a car. This could be about a guy possibly hiding inside a car or whatever. So we created a 4-person task force. And we'll call this gentleman up here on top left the spotter. Now, we're having him look to the inside of these buildings. These are buildings and not alleys, but like entrances. And he's visually inspecting that area. And while he's going along, he's also visually looking to the street side and looking inside the cars for things that might harm us, propane tanks, gasoline tanks, etc. And he's also looking for objects that might be in here. There might be something as simple and obvious as a pressure cooker. There might be a suitcase. There might be a bag of garbage. And he's going to alert the canine team in the rear here in the top right. And that canine handler is going to direct his dog towards those items that this spotter is looking at. So we don't burn that dog out, because we had to keep these dogs sharp and we didn't have a lot of rest periods. Now, in the street level here, we also had another spotter, and that spotter was doing the same on this side of the street by looking in the car and looking on this side, but he also was gazing his eyes over to the left here for obvious signs under vehicles, around vehicles that might harm us, so that we didn't proceed. Should we see something obvious, we would address it. And that canine too was being directed to objects to check. Their flow was going to our left looking at the screen, and they went down this side of the street and would come up on the other side of the street and clear that side till we were satisfied that that block became cleared. We eventually had to incorporate this with some help. We had to stop street traffic here on both sides to protect the dogs and the handlers. And the last thing we want to do in today's day and age is have a device actually detonate and have cars going by and create injuries that just aren't needed. One of the things we discussed at the after action was, instead of just doing 4 people here, we would do 8 and process the street at the same time. Well, we began to think about that, and we were risking the safety of the other 4. If there was something here that could harm us, I would rather, not that I'd rather, but it would probably minimize our safety risk if we only hurt 4 people instead of 8. So although it wasn't as fast as we would have liked it, we did go with our 4-person task force. And again, this is just another blown up version of it. Now, these spotters that are here, these aren't just normal police. They can be when needed, but the spotters you want to pick in a situation like this when you're trying to recover some kind of evidence are not people that just signed on yesterday, the rookies. There might be 1 or 2 in there that would be good, but you want people that actually know what some of these threats look like, where they might be disguised. A bomb tech would be a great guy to have here. He would be my first pick. My second pick would be a tactical guy. And also an equally good pick here would be another canine handler without his dog. And if you had that working for you, you had enough of these canine handlers, then we could just switch spots with canine teams eventually and not burn anybody out. And that would help as well. So New York City streets obviously have a lot of distractions in them, and they managed to do this, and they did it very well. Eventually, this 4-person task force that we were able to rotate in and out became a series of 6 4-person task forces, 24 people. We grew to 6 task forces within a few hours, and we were able to accumulate a lot of extra canine handlers, a lot of spotters, a lot of people that were helping us close off traffic. And eventually we also added on to that, and we had some force protection for our teams. And we had people watching people on us and also blocking the street of any type of pedestrian traffic, because the city was wide open during all this. So how did we get to that point? How did we get all those canine teams together? How did we get the spotters together? How did we get everything that we needed to get this job done? It took several hours to amass the group of specialists that we needed. And canine handlers are specialists. They're not just guys you can just, here, you go handle that dog. We're trained to a very high level. And we need to always remember that a lot of supervision respects the training that we have. And they lean on us for our opinions and our ideas. And I can speak to a lot of things. I have learned a lot in my career from canine handlers that I've worked with, that have worked for me, and even those that haven't. I just find that most canine handlers are type A personalities that want to get the job done, and they are just great at coming up ways to get it done. So we had this event. It was a bad event. Again, this isn't a war story or an AAR. Out of this event, we were able to find a new way to clear streets. We had never trained to clear that many streets in all of our training before. And, sometimes I go, duh, maybe we should have. And that's one of these major lessons learned from this event. But how did we grow to all these teams out there? How did we get it done? So I want to explain some very basic things. And everybody's been to ICS 100, 200, maybe 3, 7. And I got to be honest with you, it's a very effective way to do business, but it's also very boring, because all of the training I've received in ICS has dealt with forms and names of the structure. I'm going to teach down and dirty ICS that we can apply to this scene, which was a major, highly complex, multiple agency, multiple site incident, or we can just apply it to a simple search for a person, a firearm, a gun, a stolen car. We can apply this to not just canine, but to any situation that occurs in our jurisdictions and where we work. So there's 3 things necessary to make ICS work and get things going. We need a command post, we need a staging area, and we need a triage area. And I'm going to say that most people right now who are canine handlers are looking up and going, that's not my problem. Well, I'm going to tell you, it should be in our culture. We should be teaching it to all of our people, because remember, we're specialists. We are going to all the sites and all the scenes where there are major incidents, and we're usually key players in it. So how do we get all the resources we need to assist us to get through these problems without these 3 things? And it's got to be a cultural thing. I feel it's important that the first on the scene, and usually first people on scene are a lot of times canine handlers because we're all type A. We listen to our radios, and all we want to do is use that tool that we were trained with, that canine. We want to get out and use it somehow. So the canine involvement here in all three of these areas is going to be force protection. And if you have the resource, an explosive sweep to make sure that that area is safe. All three of these locations are going to be prime areas to hurt cops, hurt fire, hurt EMS. And if a canine officer is there and he establishes these three areas, he is going to help the organization and the scene so much. And I have to say this, in today's world where our bite work is becoming less and less common, becoming more and more risky because of litigation, not because we're doing it wrong, but because we're perceived as doing things incorrectly sometimes, we better find a way to use our dogs. Canine is a pretty needy unit. We need special dogs, we need special cars, we need training time, we need a lot of equipment. We need not only to be trained initially, but to have ongoing training. So from a boss's point of view, we are needy. So if we're starting to lose some of our utility on the street, and we're not able to do some of the things we've been trained for in the past, we better transfer some of our knowledge and some of our ability over to help the agency in other areas. And I'm going to propose to everybody on this webinar that these are three areas where you can become a part of the solution and actually get accolades from not only bosses, other agencies, but the public as well. And these command posts are very important. So why the heck would we want to go through a command post? Okay, we need a coordinated response. A lot of times it's not just the police, it's fire, it's EMS. If this situation wasn't a bombing incident, and let's say it was a major crash of some type, a school bus crash, and we had multiple injured, we'd probably in this command post not just have police and fire and EMS, but we'd probably have somebody there who was running aviation. We'd probably have people there who were going to be from the bus company, maybe a supervisor, to tell us about how that new bus route might be rerouted so we didn't cause delays. The command post is more than just us. Sometimes there's civilians in there, and they can be pretty helpful. We're going to need to have force protection there because once we hurt somebody initially, I'll give something. We had the Christmas Day parade the other day in Wisconsin with multiple fatalities out there. I'm sure that command post was a little bit nervous that there might be another party out there who might want to do damage, and we have to protect ourselves. So force protection is a must. Canine in my world is we can transfer some of our knowledge, and we can actually go out there and start, since we're on scene first, let's establish it. Let's call it out and say we've established a command post at Main and Pike, and then let's make sure it's secure. Now, you may not have an explosive dog. That's fine. We still have a set of eyes. We shouldn't set this command post up at a Greyhound bus accident on top of 4 pieces of luggage, because that has a potential to hurt us. Or we have to use good common sense. So a canine handler, being the specialist he is, can find that location and really give some thought to how people are going to get in and get out and make it work. So that's our command post. So the simplest of command posts in my world is a police car with an orange cone on top of it. And it works beautifully. You don't have to have this huge bread truck show up in the beginning. It's just a simple place where I know where to go for information. The radio might be crazy. There might be a lot of chatter going on until somebody establishes themselves as the incident commander. But right here, I know when I get there, I'm going to find the heads of the agencies that I need to speak with to size up what's going on. And the instructions that are given to them, like in this case that night, we need multiple canine handlers. We need multiple specialized people to help us. That's how it all started, with the simple command post. It evolved rather quickly in all situations. You know, it's good to have these guys involved. I'm not a fireman, but I do know that they have an awful lot of special skills and they have an awful lot of equipment, and we can use them all the time to assist us in almost every single thing we do. So this was a bus that we created to just do canine, a unified command post for canine only. And you could make this work for a unified command post for any situation. And it was very simple. It had a fancy paint job, thank God. We put 2 computers in it, and we had radios that could talk all over the locations and jurisdictions that we worked in, which was quite helpful. But we didn't forget why we're really here, and that was for our dogs too. So we had kennel facilities, you know, crude as they are, but they worked, and they worked well. So we could rotate our teams in and out of there and give them some rest as well. So next thing is the staging area. What's the purpose of a staging area? We need to know what our resources are and what else is available to us. So a staging area is going to be very important, and it's going to help us get people organized and get into one place. The command post is for the bosses in Simple World in the organization, and the staging area is for us to get out and get all our specialized tools and equipment together, and we can easily fill the needs of the scene. Somebody's got to be in charge in the staging area, and you know, it could be a sergeant, it could be a police officer, it could be anybody, but they got to take charge, and they have to keep track of what's in that staging area. And that staging area has to be secure too. Again, we're putting a bunch of police and fire and EMS in one location that we're going to call and roll out to scenes, just like we did it that night with the bombing. If we didn't have these 3 things, we wouldn't have had the support we need to resolve it very safely. Your communications unit has to be involved with these locations. They have to know where they are. And as more people are pouring in and into this location for staging, we have to get it over the air over and over again, respond to Main and Pike or Main and First, wherever you're going to set up the staging area, so they don't all show up at the command posts, because that's not where they're needed. They have to check into the staging area, meet with the sergeant, tell them what they have. I have a long gun, I have a dog, I have a shotgun, I have whatever I need, acoustics, just so we have a list going of what we can deploy. Okay, again, canine involvement of this is protection and security. There's another job for our canine officers, a very important job, to help establish the staging area, turn it over to that sergeant, and make sure ongoing throughout the incident that it's always secure. Not just once, but throughout the entire event. So this is just a picture of a quick and hastily made staging area of an active shooter up in the Bronx. Multiple tactical units showed up at that and were staged so they could deploy to the scene. It doesn't make a lot of sense to have people just self-deploy to different areas. We have to have control. So why a staging area? And here's my favorite reason. If we don't have a staging area and we just show up, I'm just Police Officer John Jones, and I show up and station myself where I think I should go without the knowledge and the briefing that the people in the command post have, I'm more than likely going to default to that left picture. I'm going to sit, I'm going to start discussing things. I'm going to be ready to work, but I'm probably not as ready as I should be. Whereas if I'm in this staging area and I've given a list of my equipment that I have ready to use and my skills to that staging manager, I'm ready to go. Being on the left is not ready. Being on the right, there's an example of being ready. Okay, and that's important. And I think that's a true difference in our having a staging area and just having us self-deploy to something. Why would we want to have a medical site that's just for medical only? It's pretty obvious. We all understand it. We want to take care of everybody. We want to have the injuries taken care of quickly. We want to keep track of them. And remember, they could be us too, not necessarily only civilians here. It's very important that we have this established. And then eventually, and there's an awful lot of school work these days where we have school threats and, unfortunately some shootings. They can assist in reunification by keeping some type of track of who's in that triage area, a list of who the wounded are, what status they're in, and EMS is excellent at putting that information together for us. It's not like we got to do it ourselves. And again, we want the canine officer to initiate that location and start directing people when the ambulances show to that site. And again, that staging manager will know what's available there, and we might even put another officer there to try to coordinate this site. So we have 3 sites. We have a command post that our canine has established. He's taken an active role and he's keeping it secure. We have a staging area where all our assets are going to, and he's keeping it secure. And now we have a medical triage area where he's going to assist and keep it secure for us. If I'm a bad guy, and I'm not going to define a bad guy, I think we all know who they are. It could be anybody. The bad guy that we used to have in our brains 15 years ago was, an idea we had. And today, our bad guy could be anybody, anything. He could try to hurt us any way he wants. And if I was a bad guy and I did something like set off a bomb or drive a car into a parade or do anything, take over a bus and crash it, whatever, I would do. If I was still living, I would get up and I would run to the place where the AIDs were getting handled, and I would try to do damage there. I would send somebody to an emergency room in a hospital, and I would try to hurt people in there. Everything I could do to hurt the first responders and the injured, that would be my secondary means of hurting people. And we got to remember that. Just because that first incident goes and it's over, there might be a second and third incident coming. And that's why we're being careful with these 3 sites. Now, this was we had a couple of train incidents in the East Coast here over the past few years, and there were several fatalities at them. So I'm going to give you some extra ideas here that could help us. And again, this could be a canine duty, and it can be a really important one for people. If you look at the slide on the left, you'll see that there's multiple sheets being held up by cops there. And obviously there's probably a not pretty scene in back of that where there's probably a person under that train. And obviously this picture was taken from open source from a news media outlet. And I want to draw your attention to the right side. And you'll notice with that train car that's on its side, there were multiple fatalities here. And again, you'll see a white sheet over here, and we have a decedent there. And it's in full view of the press. So how do we control that? I think it's important that we stage our press where we want them to be. There's a couple of reasons. A, it's safety. We don't want them getting hurt, going to areas where they're going to get hurt and just floating out all over the place. They're going to contaminate crime scenes. They're going to hurt themselves and possibly others. So we need to create a staging area for the press. And whenever I've had any kind of problems with the press pushing back on this, when I explain to them what we're doing, and we're going to give them their own special area where they can film from, where they can get their interviews from, they're pretty happy with that, because most of the time they're never treated like that. They're just kind of pushed away, and then they always come in through the back way and do their own thing. So if we contain them in one area and give them a place where they can do these types of news conferences, and we also select the filming that they can do, because I don't think it's right to film a lot of decedents to their family members. These are victims usually, and it's just not a humane way to treat the deceased, and most importantly, the families. And we need to make sure that we are respectful of that. So whenever anything major happens in any town, and it could be whatever state we're in, whatever county we're in, or wherever jurisdiction we work on, you can be sure of one thing: politicians will come streaming in quickly, and they'll all want to get in front of those guys, the press. This is a very important area to contain. So, you know, the guy who's just doing a quick 30-second blurb on the news is one thing, but if we put them all together and give them all equal footing, it really helps the scene. So, listen, we have a major event, something bad happened in my town. I'm not sure. Remember, this is very basic ICS we're talking about here, and some of this knowledge everybody I'm talking to already has, and I'm just reviewing it. What are we going to do? We just had something major happen. Something bad happened in our town. Okay, we got to protect that command post. That canine has to get over there. We have to protect it. We have to protect the staging area. It's important. We have to protect the triage area. Secondary attacks are very, very common these days, not just in the terrorism world, but in any kind of incident right now where bad people are trying to hurt. We're always going to have a hot zone, a warm zone, secondaries. You know, in the initial few minutes of that event, we're going to try to lay things out a little closer. Are we going to need more resources? Is this thing going to go on for a couple hours, or is it just over? Is it a simple robbery that there's only one robbery, 2 victims, somebody shot and nothing else is going on? This guy didn't go steal a car and crash it somewhere else. Are we going to need more resources? That's what we got to start to think about. That's the command post has to know that. I need more help here. Okay, now what? Who has the contacts for all these canine guides that I need? Is it, let's say there's 10 jurisdictions surrounding where we work, and there's 10 or 12 canine units. Who has those contacts? Is it communications? Maybe, maybe not. Is it the canine trainer or the canine sergeant only, and they're off or they're on vacation? These are things you got to think about before something bad happens. These types of contacts should be shared. Now, mutual aid agreements are hopefully in place, and these people are going to be allowed to respond. But most of us are usually watching the news at this point, and we're already starting to get ready, and we're contacting, you know, our supervision and asking, should we go? But it's important that we have these contacts. Short term, after the initial event, we're going to have a real big pickup in call volume. Whatever happens is going to create more calls. People are going to be calling in. I heard a loud noise. I heard a bang. There's people arguing. There's people screaming. The phones are going to light up. And then also you have that factor. If you see something, say something. I remember after the Boston Marathon bombing, the next morning they thought that one of the perps had gotten on an Amtrak train going to New York City. And I correctly predicted that train would get stopped at every location between Boston and New York and searched. And it pretty much did. Again, I call them ghost calls. People think they see something. They're trying to be good people, and they call it in. Okay, we have to think about the long-term safety of our search teams. And what we learned in that quick review of the Chelsea item was that we had to control traffic and we had to control pedestrians. So canine handlers, it's split across the country on this. I think it's important that canine handlers have TAC vests and TAC helmets and have TAC radio equipment to communicate, because we're putting them in really bad situations, and they should be as tactically equipped as everybody else who's involved in that scene. And it wasn't always like this, but I promote that all the time. We need to have our men used to working with it, and women, and we need to have the dogs, most importantly, exposed to it and around it. Traffic control is important, pedestrian control, force protection for everybody. How the heck are we going to get all this done? We can't do this ourselves. It goes back to that command post, staging area. That's what's going to feed all these extra resources that we're going to need. So one thing everybody overlooks, and it's so important, we got a lot of knowledge to pick up on what happened, and we got to start sharing it. The best way to make use of our resources is to give the people on the street the most knowledge they can possibly have. The bosses, the upper leadership should not be the ones having the pictures of the bad guy. We on the street need to have that information shared, and that's important that as supervisors, we make that happen and that our police officers benefit from that. Get as much information as we can about any of the other incidents and prepare a real quick brief. This is on the command post about what happened and what's happened since the initial incident. If there's a bad guy involved or an item, a device or something, we need to get pictures of him or it out to the troops on the street that are searching. And with today's phones, there's no reason that we shouldn't have it quickly. Absolutely no reason at all. How it's things placed, if it was an item, what is your team looking for? Pictures, just pictures mean so much, and it shouldn't be a booking picture from 10 years ago, with no beard. Now the guy's got a beard and he looks 10 years older, and 10 more years on the street, he doesn't look anything like that. Hopefully it's surveillance footage of something that happened, and it should be shared quickly. And of course, direction of flight. Where was he last seen? If we don't have that as accurate information, we're wasting our time. Steve had talked about containment, and containment is so important. Long-term factors, and here it comes again. This command post that our canine guys established and are protecting are helping us, because we're going to burn out our canine teams unless we get more people, and that's one of the roles of the commander and of the command post, to make sure we get these resources in. We need to rotate the teams so they don't burn out. We need to rotate spotters. We don't settle for unqualified spotters, because we need people who know what they're looking for. We need to think about water and food for our animals and for us, and rest is most important, because if we burn ourselves out real quick, and this is going to be a long incident, we're not going to be any good. We're going to get very careless, and we're going to get injured. So one of the good things that came out of something that happened here in New York State, we had some escaped prisoners in upstate New York, and multiple agencies were looking for them. And they found that although they had plenty of canine handlers present, because they had established this command post and staging area, guess what? Their equipment was breaking down. They were running out of food. This was a week-long search for a couple of individuals. And New York State came up with a program for us. They got some canine people together, and we made a list of canine equipment that was necessary: tracking leads, harnesses, food, water, batteries, things of that nature that we could store and have ready to roll anytime we needed it. And they deployed it across the state at a lot of different events and incidents, and it's come in very, very handy. And this was born out of a bad incident. And that's where all our good things happen, when we faced with very challenging bad incidents. Again, I'm going to close with this. This is all about being flexible. It's about not having everything in place when we need it and making it work anyhow. And like I like to say to people, who says you can't play golf with apples if you don't have any golf balls? So with that, I'm going to conclude. I want to thank everybody. I hope somebody got something out of this. And my outlook comes from years of experience as a canine handler, canine supervisor, and as a commanding officer. And I like to think that today's canine officer is going to be tomorrow's commanding officer. So it's important that we always treat each other with respect. It's important that we listen to each other. And it's important that we all get home safe. Thank you.
Thanks, John. That was really great. It was excellent. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So anyway, guys, thank you for being here. Listen, we're here talking about dogs, right? And I think it's wonderful that we have such a fine group put together to talk about some of our experiences. It's kind of like a textbook, but with real people explaining their real situations and how they apply to perhaps your agency or to you. But before I get going, I want to thank Dawn. I want to thank everybody else that's involved. And I want to kind of explain to you real quickly how we put these together. Every Monday we meet for an hour to talk about the current events in Canine. We talk about how to best get practices out there that might be beneficial to all the agencies that at least watching or at least in our organization, so that they might not go through some of those things that we see on television. We also want to make it so that we just get to a position where we're improving the dog units. And I'm honored to be with some of these people. I mean, we got LAPD here, Seattle PD, we have NYPD, we have a world-renowned attorney with us. And then there's me, and everyone like, well, where do you fall in? Well, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I come from New Hampshire. I worked in the 6th largest city in New Hampshire, which is only between 60 and 80,000 people, depending on if it's tourist season or not. We had 110 people in the department. We had 3 dogs. I was one of the dog handlers for 15 years. And not only did I have to shag about 350 dog calls a year for each dog, not only did I have to do my part in that, I also had to have shag calls, so I was going to the shoplifting calls, the car accident calls, and things like that. So very often, we already talked about it, but, I was the first incident commander on scene. I was the first responding officer who was directing other police officers to come in. Not only that is the departments that make up the surrounding areas to my community were very small, and sometimes they didn't even have midnight cops working. So we had to go and take care of the calls in their communities. So, sometimes backing up or going to some calls in different communities is very much different. And I relate the story of how one time I was searching for a bank robber for another community, and the backup that was assigned to me was not another Portsmouth cop, but was this community cop. And he took out his pipe and started smoking it like we were going on a fox hunt in Britain. And I'm like, oh my goodness gracious, what have I got myself into? So, we want to make sure that you're also adding these type of seminars or these type of webinars that you're attending to your in-service training log to help show that you are an experienced and fully trained dog handler. But I want to talk with you, ICS Light. I think that ties in pretty well with what I wanted to talk about, coming from my type of a community where, some of my backups were volunteer firemen who were 3 streets over, who were helping contain either the lost person or the whatever person I was looking for. And I had no idea that fireman was even there. So, problems of self-reporting. I remember we're 4 hours from the Canadian border, and I once had a Canadian border customs officer at the call. And I'm like, oh my goodness gracious, where the hell did you come from? And it was just, there's problems of self-reporting, not just in the police world, but outside the police world. I remember dispatched to a traffic accident in a snowstorm, and they immediately sent out the wrecker, one of the wreckers, figuring that there was going to be a car that needed to be moved or out of the ditch. I ended up getting in a fight with the driver of drunk driving, and the backup officer I had was, the tow truck driver. He was the one that was there helping me helping me get this guy handcuffed. So sometimes self-reporting is good, but most of the time self-reporting is very confusing and can add very many layers. Listen, when you go to a scene, sometimes the handler is relied upon for their experience. One thing that is definitely known in my area is that the dog handlers are some of the most tactically sound people that you're going to have at a call. They have a lot of experience in going after felons. They have a lot of experience into going into chaotic and high stressful type of situations. They have just a lot of street experience because usually the dog assignment has kept them from accepting promotions within their department. So we'll have the 15, 25-year street cop dog handler, not because they can't make sergeant, but because the sergeant's position is always turned down by them because they choose to stay in canine. So a lot of times our dog handlers have significant experience that is going to be relied upon and needed at that call. But listen, when you get there, make sure you check in the immediate area first, right? Don't rely upon the reports of the place last seen to be accurate. Don't even rely upon that command post, whether it be at the trunk of another cruiser or one of the fire trucks. Don't even rely upon that as a secure area until you know it's actually secured. And I can give you a couple examples of, a pursuit where, the police officer who was pursuing chased the guy into the woods for several hundred yards, lost sight, lost sound of the person he was pursuing, did the right thing, hunkered down, stayed in the area. But you know where the driver was? Yes, he was in the ditch, not 25 feet from the car when it crashed. He never went into the woods. He just bunkered down right into the drainage ditch. And so make sure you check the place last seen. And how many times have we found runaways, or how many times have we found the lost Alzheimer's person still on the property? They never did actually ever go into the woods, as was assumed by family members and then reassumed by first responding officers. So make sure you're checking that place last seen. As I move on, sometimes the dog is not the right tool that you are. And I get back to some of the experience that a dog handler brings to the call. And sometimes it's their tactical or their maturity, or sometimes their informal leadership or their charisma in the field itself. For some reason, they become the actual leader. There's some communities where, our rookie patrol officers have significantly more experience than seasoned lieutenants in other agencies, just because the volume of calls that we used to get as opposed to what they get in their sleepy bedroom town. So, all things are not equal, right? And you have to make sure that sometimes they're calling you to the scene because they want the dog. But in reality, when you get there, it's really you that is needed more than the dog right now. And I think Scott mentioned that specifically. Sometimes, the dog is not the right tool, that you have to assume the incident command without the dog. And you have to start doing different things other than trying to use the dog to find something or someone. And I say slow the call down if possible, and that goes true with any type of command. Take a deep breath and get rid of that tunnel vision, left, right, up, down with your eyes to help control tunnel vision and help slow the stress of the call down. You got to do it with yourself, and then you try to do it with everyone around you. You need to become situationally aware, and before you start deploying yourself into that swamp, or before you start throwing yourself into some neighborhoods. And you need to make sure that you at least trying to slow the call down if possible. And sometimes it's just so active and so in progress that it's still really much at that chaotic level. But as soon as you can, keep that in mind. You need to slow the call down. And then the last part I want to talk about, because I get the back cleanup and a lot of what I wanted to talk about is being talked about already. But I want to touch upon a little bit of the emotional part of deploying the dog into danger. I did meet more than one handler who was very reluctant about deploying their dog into a dangerous situation. They had formed such a tight bond with that dog that dog was, part of the family, and we say it is. But when it came to actually getting that dog into that position where they might take some fire or even get killed, there was significant hesitancy in the part of the dog handler, which made me question whether the dog handler was even emotionally prepared to go on that call or not, and how that might turn out. So you need to kind of make sure that there is an emotional part of deploying the dog. And then, there's an emotional part of deploying if an officer is down or one of your partners was involved in the call and is now, being treated. there's an emotional component there, and to make sure that we are using the dog properly as a use of force tool, as a search tool, or whatnot. And we need to make sure that we have that emotional component under control, and we are truly professionals when we are working the dog, whether we are working the dog or whether we're just being the incident commander. So anyway, listen, that's my time. I want to thank you guys. I want to thank you for being here. Make sure you get this into your in-service training logs, and I'm especially honored to share the stage with everybody else. So Don, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Lou. It's appreciated. Very eloquently said, by the way. I'd like to ask Steve White to close us up here.
You know, this webinar is intended for canine handlers, and I think the takeaways from this, the common threads that you see from all the speakers, are that canine, by its very nature, takes us into high-risk calls in a way that patrol officers don't. On a day-to-day basis, canine is has the highest day-to-day risk exposure of any unit and department because of the calls for which we're selected. We go, and I am going to, from this day forward, borrow Scott Sargent's term of describing you as senior tacticians. And if you are not yet so designated, create that terminology. I'm going to use it. I'm going to recommend everybody I talk to use it and do this. And that they also harness ICS's scalable nature and implement ICS Lite in everything they do with this, because canine searches are the ones that are going to, in today's modern operating environment, bring the highest level of scrutiny of almost anything you do. There is especially with body cameras and everybody having cell phones out there, surveillance cameras everywhere, the chance of the image of a canine capture being on camera is tremendous. And it has a visceral impact on the viewer. And we can control the way that looks by operating with utmost professionalism. And that means coming into this with a plan, knowing where we're going, having started from our command post with good, accurate information, a well-formed and well-planned tactical team, and moving forward from there. And I think that, that John Kerwick has been around. I wish things had worked here, because this guy has worked in an agency where some of the biggest incidents in the country have happened under his watch, and he and his team have had to manage them. And Luke Verland is somebody who has worked at all levels. He has one thing that the rest of us don't, and he's seen this from the police executive level, and he understands it as an officer too. And we need to go ahead and realize that shared wisdom that comes from understanding what an executive has to get accomplished with the people and tools they have in hand is important. And I like I said, Scott Sargent's presentation should be a standalone by itself. People need to get this and get it and get it and get it and get it again. And if I have one thing to say from you, failure is your friend. If you harness it, the information from it, you can make yourself better. Scott talked about continual improvement. There's a Japanese phenomenon or a philosophy called Kaizen, which means the pursuit of continual improvement. It means you can never be perfect, but you should always strive for it by taking every outcome and making yourself better. I embrace that so much that that's my dog's name. My dog's name is Kaizen. And I hope to live up to that name myself someday, and I hope you all will too. It's back to you, Don.
Thank you, everyone. This has been quite a year for us. This is our last presentation of 2021, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much for attending.